Week 17 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few kickers I have as sleepers this week. The first guy, Mason Crosby of the Green Bay Packers. So right here, Crosby, I know it hasn't been the greatest of seasons for him this season, but the last few weeks he's actually been putting up fantasy points. And this week he's got a great matchup versus the Vikings. I give up the most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So the last few weeks for Crosby, Week 13 at Chicago, 8 fantasy points. Week 15 versus the Rams, 6. And Week 16 at the Miami Dolphins, 15. So right now, great matchup this week here versus the Minnesota Vikings. A defense that isn't all that great. And I think the Packers could get in the red zone a decent amount of times. We know this season, though, it's been tough for them to score more than 2 or 3 touchdowns per game for this Packer team. And that's where Mason Crosby is going to come in, and he's going to hit a few field goals in this one. And he's available right now, 96% of fantasy leagues. The next kicker is Matt Prater of the Arizona Cardinals. I got a couple questions about Prater this week. Yes, he wasn't in my top 12, but yeah, he could be a guy that definitely can help fantasy owners, especially in an indoor game at Atlanta, and coming off of 2 monster ball games as well. So the last few games here for Prater: Week 12 versus the Chargers, 7. Week 14 versus New England, 7. Week 15 at Denver, 14. Week 16 versus Tampa Bay, 14. So this week here, good matchup at Atlanta indoors, obviously, which is always a plus this late in the season. And the Falcons do give up the 12th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So right now, this could be a field goal type of game between Young Hoku and Matt Prater. And I like both of those options if you don't have one of those guys within the top 12. So right now, available 90% of fantasy leagues here is Prater. And he's a sleeper this week. And the third and final kicker I have is a sleeper. He's Riley Patterson of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So he's really come on over the last few weeks here, is Riley Patterson. And so is this Jacksonville Jaguar team as a whole, putting up a lot of points the last few weeks. Week 13 at Detroit, 7 fantasy points. Week 14 at Tennessee, 13. Week 15 versus Dallas, 11. And Week 16 at the Jets in a rainstorm, 15 fantasy points. So this week here, good news for Patterson and the Jaguars. Indoor game at Houston. Then Houston gives up the 11th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So I think at minimum he's going to get 2 or 3 opportunities for field goals and possibly a few extra points as well. And he's available right now, 95% of fantasy leagues. So that's a few kickers I have as sleepers here for Week 17 of the fantasy football season.